Rome wasn't built in a day, but what if we told you it was built on secrets? Welcome back, everyone. Here are the darkest secrets of the Roman Empire that you probably didn't know. Emperor Augustus. You may have heard about Rome being founded by Romulus, who killed his twin brother Remus after the two of them had been raised by a she-wolf. This is considered a foundational myth that attempts to explain the origins of Rome. The story goes that Romulus and Remus were twins who were born to be kings. But when their father, Numitor, was overthrown by their wicked uncle Amulius, he commanded that the twins be put to death. However, Amulius's soldiers left the infants in the care of a shepherdess named Laurentia, who survived by nursing the twins with her own milk. To protect the babies from harm, the she-wolf then adopted them and took them into the wild, where she raised them as her own. Romulus and Remus then went on to defeat Amulius, reclaim the throne, and found the city of Rome. So it's only fitting that the first secret we unearth today should be related to the legendary founder of the Roman Empire. His real name was actually Octavian. It's no secret that one of the most prominent emperors in Roman history was Augustus. He is considered to be the first emperor of Rome, having ruled for over 40 years, longer than any other emperor. And he also helped transform Rome from a republic into an empire. However, most people don't realize that the title Augustus wasn't actually his real name. In fact, it was bestowed upon him as a sort of honorific. His birth name was Gaius Octavius, but he later changed it to Augustus, which is Latin for majestic or impressive. He chose this new name because it was associated with the first deified king of Italy, the mythical king Numa Pompilius. Augustus was so pleased with his new name that he even built a temple dedicated to himself, something that hadn't been done since the overthrow of the monarchy some 200 years earlier. The Great Fire of Rome. Everyone knows that Rome wasn't built in a day, but what if we told you it almost burned down in a single night? That's right. One of the biggest disasters to befall Rome during the rule of Emperor Nero was the devastating fire that swept through the city. It started on the night of July 19, 64 AD, and it raged for 6 days before it was finally extinguished. A large part of the city was destroyed, displacing nearly half of Rome's population. And although the cause of the fire is unknown, historians like Suetonius have blamed Nero for starting the blaze, so that he could rebuild the city in his own image. He did take advantage of the situation to construct luxurious buildings and refurbish his own palace. And although he tried to pass the blame off onto a group of Christians, they were just the scapegoats. And the true culprit was likely the emperor himself. Infanticide. If you ask any historian, one of the most pressing issues facing the world today is overpopulation. But did you know that this has been a problem in the past as well? As a matter of fact, overpopulation was such a concern in ancient Rome that the government had to pass laws to control it. During the rule of Augustus, there were so many children being born that the Senate passed a law which forbade anyone who had given birth to 3 or more children from getting married. They also passed another law which prohibited women from giving birth to more than 2 children, and if any woman managed to have triplets, all but the firstborn son would be put to death. Although infanticide was common throughout the ancient world, Rome was particularly brutal, killing off nearly 40% of all infants. Most of these killings were done away with exposure, where unwanted babies were simply left out in the elements to die. Sometimes wet nurses were even hired to carry out the killings. And even though the practice was eventually banned, it still went on for centuries. Gladiators weren't just slaves. Even though gladiators were prominent in Roman culture, they were still viewed as little more than pawns in the games played by the wealthy and powerful. It was believed that gladiators were mostly slaves, criminals, and prisoners of war, but that's not entirely true. Sure, there were plenty of slaves and prisoners forced into the games, but there were also free men who volunteered for the gladiator games. And they weren't necessarily poor either. Many of these volunteers came from wealthy and influential families, and they were usually educated, athletic young men who wanted to make a name for themselves. In fact, some of them even gained celebrity status and legions of adoring fans. Unfortunately, this profession was extremely dangerous, and many of them died in the arena before ever achieving fame. Roman emperors were toxic. You may have heard about the infamous Ides of March when Julius Caesar was stabbed to death by a group of senators. But do you know why? According to Plutarch, Caesar's ambition and lust for power made him enemies all across Rome, and so a conspiracy was formed to take his life and end his reign. While he may not have been the best emperor, he certainly wasn't the worst. Just look at Caligula, who took sadism to a whole new level. He ruled like a god over his people, and he delighted in throwing gold coins from a tower, enjoying the sight of common folk fighting over the riches. When he wasn't busy throwing money around, he was throwing people in the dungeons where he chained up his victims, forcing them to watch as he prostituted his wife and daughter. Caligula was eventually assassinated on the orders of his own grandmother, Julia Maesa, but the reign of terror didn't end there. Caligula's great-uncle, Nero, was infamous for his extravagance and insanity. He hosted feasts inviting 8 men of only one type, bald, short, or fat, and when he wasn't hosting parties, he was murdering people, including his own mother. One time, he unleashed poisonous snakes into the audience at the gladiator games and watched with amusement as the crowds panicked and fell victim to poisonous bites. He was eventually killed by his own mother, Poppaea Sabina, after he tried to kill her. Spies and traitors. What is the greatest threat to a civilization? Is it natural disaster, disease, or perhaps war? How about betrayal from within? For the Roman Empire, its downfall came from a series of internal conflicts that led to decades of civil war. After the assassination of Julius Caesar, the Roman Republic descended into chaos as various factions battled for control. There was the first triumvirate consisting of Pompey, Crassus, and Caesar, followed by the second triumvirate between Octavian, Mark Antony, and Cleopatra. Then there was the infamous triumvir, Sextus Pompey, who controlled the seas around Rome. Not to mention the constant threat posed by Julius Caesar's adopted son Octavian, who was determined to seize power for himself. In the end, Octavian emerged victorious and established the Roman Empire. But it was only after a decade of bloodshed and treachery. Public executions. Today, we think of execution as something carried out swiftly and discreetly, but things were much different in the days of the Roman Empire. Public executions were a common form of entertainment, and the more spectacular, the better. The condemned would often be put to death in front of crowds of spectators, and their bodies would be left on display as a warning to others. Some executions were carried out by sword, while others were carried out by crucifixion. Others were thrown to the lions, while still others were put to death by poison or starvation. One of the most gruesome forms of capital punishment was the use of the rack. This involved stretching the condemned's body on a frame until their bones were broken. Needless to say, public executions were a brutal and terrifying affair, but they were also an important part of Roman life. They were a way of controlling the population and keeping order in society. They were also a way of appeasing the gods and ensuring the safety of the state. Ancient Rome was filthy. Today, we think of ancient Rome as a bustling metropolis, a center of trade and commerce, and a hub of culture and intellectual activity. But Rome was also a city of filth. The streets were dirty and crowded, and sanitation was virtually non-existent. Garbage was thrown into the Tiber River, and the air was thick with the stench of stale waste. Citizens had no choice but to share their living spaces with rats, mice, and insects. And to top it all off, there was the constant threat of disease. In the year 64, Rome was hit by a plague that killed thousands. The outbreak was so severe that it led to the closing of schools and businesses. And even the emperor's daughter died from the illness. The outbreak eventually subsided, but it was clear that something had to be done to improve sanitation in the city. The Emperor Nero eventually implemented some measures to improve public health, but it was too little too late. The damage had already been done, and Rome was never truly the same again. Rome wasn't built in a day, but it sure did burn down fast. What do you think is the most shocking secret about ancient Rome? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos like this. See you next time.